Hello, welcome to Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Mark Cate.
And I'm Chad Lott.
This is episode 57. We're going to be talking about the Jim Jarmusch film The Dead Don't Die, which is still in theaters 2019. And just to get you ready, for our next episode, it will be either the new Child's Play from 2019 or the original Poltergeist, with guest, our friend Joshua Grinnell, Peaches Christ. It just depends which we can schedule first, but it's going to be one of those, and we will, in the next two episodes, do both.
Yeah, and I would highly recommend, in preparation for the Child's Play episode, other than seeing Child's Play,
Totally.
is maybe checking out this book that I'm in love with called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, which is the most important book about our current technology landscape.
I've been devouring that book like more than any book in maybe 10 years. I can't put it down. It's incredible.
And I don't know anybody else I feel like I'm the first person I know that read it.
Yeah. Well, what's the author's name?
Shoshana Zuboff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't even know who she is.
This
is an incredible book that, for me, I mean, obviously she's been around a long time to write a book this epic, but to me, she came out of nowhere.
Yeah. Well, she had written like a couple other books about like the changing landscape of the economy in relation to technology. She's a Harvard professor. She's an econ professor or something like that.
Oh. She's a pretty good writer for a professor.
She's a great writer. Like, it's so funny. Like, the fucking 9-volt brains out here in the world. Like, if you look at the Amazon reviews, there's like one Amazon review that's like, this book would have been great if it had been edited hardly and didn't have sentences like this. And the sentence he puts is gorgeous. And you're like, you are a fucking dullard.
It's one of the best written books I've ever read.
Yeah,
like, no question.
Like, so many of these like modern culture critique books are just written by people who just cannot fucking write. Mm-hmm. And like, they might have some good ideas or some observations or some whatever.
Well, I think you've dismissed these types of books usually as like airport philosophy books or something.
Yeah, airport grade literature.
Yeah.
I mean, they're trash. Or the ideas.
I love them. I love them all.
But you know, like, I think the books that were like, one of the things that's so incredible about this book is you could probably infer what her politics are, but they're not on her sleeve in this book. It's just like what she's talking about is a problem. She's talking about things that happened, and she lays out a case for why it's going to be an issue. And it is harrowing. Unless you're in marketing, then you're like, this fucking rules. We're going to rule everything soon.
Yeah, it's true. It's a little bit, reading this is a little bit like if you were a capitalist and read Karl Marx and got some sweet techniques out of Capital and the Communist Manifesto.
Like, I will keep the means of production away from these proles.
Is it that easy?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, we wanted to talk to you about a new branch arm of Scary Thoughts that we are going to be launching shortly, intermittently between Scary Thoughts episodes in which we address films and literature. We are going to be launching Self-Help for Nihilists.
Other than horror, like what Mark and I really bond about is the general field of self-help, like both things that are actually helpful and things that are ridiculous. Like, we both kind of love both of them, you know, jiu-jitsu and laughing at fake martial arts. Supplements that work versus quack supplements, and talking about them and thinking about them, but also like the literature of it. And like, so much of our culture is infused, especially as Americans, is infused with this weird brand of just plucky self-help shit. And I think a lot of people that have our kind of backgrounds and interests, like, you know, like punk rock or goth shit or whatever, have a weird aversion to this sort of stuff. And it's kind of a shame because a lot of it really works, man. Like, my life was completely turned around by a few of the corniest books you would ever imagine. And I think a lot of our conversations off air center around this stuff. And I think a lot of them are really fun conversations. And I think a lot of the people that we know are into this stuff too, but people don't talk about it, you know?
Well, I also think that it runs very much in parallel to our conversations about and the world of feminism, of gender politics, of watching the YouTube videos of counterpoints is not that different from listening to a Sam Harris podcast. They're all sort of in this matrix of ways of being and ways of improving your life and improving the world around you. And I think it's all fascinating and hilarious and worth looking at simultaneously critically and cynically.
Yes. I mean, a perfect example of this would be like we maybe read a Tony Robbins book and then shit all over it.
Yes.
And then we read an inspiring essay from Henry Rollins or somebody, you know, like, and just seeing about how it applies to our lives and stuff. And, you know, this is going to be listener feedback driven. You know, if people aren't into it, we'll just stop. But if it's cool.
But it kind of seems like it's the stuff that we do that people respond to the most, at least when we talk to them and get their, aside from emails where people say, hey, have you checked out this movie?
Yeah, yeah.
The rest of it is often about like, I like the way you guys talked about this thing. And that thing is often not actually the movie.
Yeah. One of our listeners, his hashtag is literary libations. Or not hashtag, sorry, I'm totally fucking it up. I suck at Twitter and Instagram and all that shit. His Instagram handle is literary.libations. Really cool guy. And he made a comment that like it's not really a horror podcast. It's just two dudes arguing about contemporary art or something like that, which I thought is pretty accurate.
So we want an excuse to argue about something else.
Yeah, and so it's also like fun to expand out a little bit because it just is, you know.
Totally. So the way we discussed starting this, especially because we like things to be listener driven, is like an advice column. Mm-hmm. So we are asking you to write in. Normally, you can write us at scarythoughts.org. But for Self-Help for Nihilists, if you need some help, reach out and email us at
nihilists@scarythoughts.org.
You just made that up. I guess I'll have to go make that email address. nihilists@scarythoughts.org. And we'll address your questions as best we can.
That should be fun. I mean, part of the inspiration too, like we had joked about this a while ago, but
I mean, I think it's still partly joking.
It is a joke. Yeah, it's pretty hilarious. But like, I mean, we live in a world where like the misfits are jacked. You know, like it's a thing, and they're like vegan, and like it's just a weird.
And living in the Bay Area, where it's just like everything is life hack culture.
Yeah.
Where even meditation is about getting ahead.
And, yeah, and then part of it too is like I think a lot of these like technologies, I consider them in a way like, you know, like behavior technologies are not used by the cool people. And it's to their disadvantage. And because a lot of it's, you look at this shit and you're like, oh my God, look at this horse-toothed motherfucker, Tony Robbins. I don't want to listen to him. I'm not walking across a fire pit. Jesus Christ. But his advice on like real estate speculation is pretty good. If you had, you know, if you actually found yourself a couple bucks, you could do well listening to him on that subject. And then the other thing is, if you haven't seen it, Nick Cave has kind of an advice column of sorts called the Red Hand Chronicles. Is that what it's called?
I forget.
Yeah, anyway, if you like type in Nick Cave, Red Hand questions answered.
Nick Cave, the musician, not the visual artist.
Yeah. It's just like a really lovely Q&A, and people write in and ask him very serious shit, and he answers it in only the way Nick Cave can, and it is delightful.
Yeah, and I think that the way that this sort of life advice spirals is interesting. Someone, Monique, my wife and I, are connected to is Beth Pickens, who not that long ago wrote the book Your Art Will Save Your Life, which is out on Feminist Press. And it's an incredible book about not falling into a pit of despair and being an artist at the same time somehow. She has this incredibly optimistic view on what it means to be an artist and how to view your work relative to the world. And she will straight up advise you to listen to Dave Ramsey.
I would too.
Right?
I mean,
no, I know.
Yeah,
but it's funny. Like she's like feminist, totally on the left. She's just like, yeah, he might remind you of your Republican grandpa, but he has the best advice on commerce possible. So
Dude,
you want to know if you need advice on money, you know who you should go to? Your Republican grandpa.
I went from being a bartender in San Francisco to owning a home here. Like, I mean, like it's in West Oakland or whatever, but like, and it's all because I followed his financial advice.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's pretty crazy. But the problem with a lot of this stuff is the tone of it is so fucking corny.
Yes.
You know?
It really is.
Yeah. So we're hoping to.
But I'm also strangely addicted to like self-help podcasts and things like that.
So that's going to be a thing. It should be fun. If it's not fun, well, you guys can go fuck yourselves.
Well, no, don't be nice.
What? This is for nihilists.
Email us with advice questions or just think something you'd like us to cover. If this makes sense to you.
Or recommendations too. If you're
That's
like in
true.
deep on The Secret or some nonsense, like we want to hear about it. Or If you're some crusty third wave feminist cat lady and you've run across some weird anomalous thing that helps your life and I want to hear that. Or if you're some like jabroni ex-bartender like myself, like, and have discovered something cool.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about The Dead Don't Die.
Yep.
We have covered a Jim Jarmusch film before. We covered Only Lovers Left Alive, which is one of my favorite movies.
Yep.
He's not one of my favorite directors, but I thought that movie really took everything that's cool about him and distilled it into a contemporary vampire film for sure.
Yeah. My experience with Jim Jarmusch is what I imagine people who get really into like fine whiskey are like. Like at first when you taste whiskey, you're like, oh, this is disgusting. And then you have to develop a taste for it. I really had to develop a taste for Jim Jarmusch movies. Like, I worked in an indie film theater when I was young. And, obviously he's a king of indie film, not the king, but a prominent figure. And people would recommend their movies to him and his movies to me. And the first one I ever saw was Ghost Dog. And I was not ready for it. Like it was just not, I didn't resonate. It wasn't loud enough for me. Like I was like, oh great, a samurai assassin hip hop movie. I want this to be just like Liquid Swords, but a movie. And it is, but it's not. And then, I watched Mystery Train and wasn't totally sold on it. And I just wasn't into it. And now I'm all in.
That's like, I'm the opposite. Them. The first one I saw was like a 12th generation VHS copy of Down by Law. And I was riveted. I was just 100% in. There's like 3 lines of dialogue in that whole black and white movie. And I was totally sold. But I don't know that says something good about me necessarily.
Well, that movie's great. I mean, it's undeniable.
Stranger Than Paradise is also like really beautiful.
Yeah, I
ultra
think
minimal.
Only Lovers Left Alive is pretty good. I loved Patterson, like the newer one. It's just about a dude riding a bus around, writing some poetry, walking his dog to a bar. Like that's the whole movie. And I really developed a taste for movies and literature where like nothing really happens, but there's like a really exquisitely rendered texture going on. And that's like my jam right now.
I think that pacing is something that he has a really unique approach to and a really singular way of dealing with. Not many filmmakers deal with pacing the way he does. I mean, obviously there are precedents like Tarkovsky and Kurosawa, but definitely not in the indie American film landscape. And he always takes as a subject something slow. Like in Ghost Dog, there's something meditative about that character. In Stranger Than Paradise, they're always waiting. In Down by Law, they're in prison. They can't go anywhere. So there are these long one-shots of them just like standing around a cell, just waiting for the day to end. And here in The Dead Don't Die, that pacing is used as a humor device. And so he takes the strategies of comedies like Parks and Rec or The Office or What We Do in the Shadows. But because that's already sort of his native tongue, he's able to sort of apply slow pacing and comedy to his home turf.
Yeah.
I guess it also, actually, Monique pointed this out, that it's sort of like Fargo in that way. It's like really, it's so slow, it's funny.
Yeah. There's like a humor in like almost the podunkness of the town. Like it's so trapped. It's like borderline Mayberry, but off.
Yeah.
But very Jim Jarmusch-ish.
I think that despite that, though, that being applied to a zombie movie is not new, because as we've talked about every time we bring up zombies, there's like 2 types of zombies. There's Romero zombies that are slow ambling, and there's Return of the Living Dead zombies that are running.
Yeah.
And running zombie movies or action movies, pretty much, slow ambling Romero movies are about the sort of existential beats or the waiting. And so, like the Romero movies, they're pretty slow.
Yeah.
Maybe not Night of the Living Dead, but especially Dawn and Day.
Very slow.
Well, Dawn and Day of the Dead, the original 2, are super super slow. So that's already there in the zombie genre. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like 28 Days Later basically asked the question, like, what if zombies were fast? This movie asked the question, what if they were slower?
Yeah. It's funny, I dug this up from TV Tropes, which is kind of one of my favorite websites. I'm just going to, pardon me while I read. While in college, as a student of Nicholas Ray, he wrote a script that was criticized by the latter for not having enough action. Jarmusch went back and promptly rewrote the script so that it contained even less action than before. Ray, impressed by his student's disobedience, hired him as an assistant.
Awesome.
That's pretty good.
I mean, man, like even the way Jarmusch talks is slow.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it is, like, you can listen to an interview with that guy, and he's like the sloth from Zootopia, like, but a director. So I loved this movie. Like, I absolutely adore it, which is very much against the grain of what people thought. But the problems I have with it are pretty severe. Like, I think there are some really, like, shitty things that this movie does, like, that are just, I would say, borderline inept. Like, things that are they're just so fucking bad.
It's funny you should say that. We walked out of the film, and I think the first thing Monique and I walked out of the film, and I think the first thing she said to me was, there were 3 things that if he just took out of the movie would have been really good.
Yeah.
Or 3 problems. If he just solved these 3 problems, like it was that simple for her. But what do you want to just like say what those issues are?
Sure. I'll start with the least serious up to the most serious. So the least serious to me is there's the scene where the 3 kids are in the cool car, and it's the car from Night of the Living Dead. It's the same exact car.
Oh.
And if you're a super nerd, you look at that car, like I knew what it was immediately. I was like, man, this is fucking, what a cool little nod. He has a character explain it in the film, and I think that's lame. Like it's uncool.
Yeah.
And that happens a few times, and it's hard to know. Okay, so there are times when characters like break the fourth wall and sort of comment on something going on in the film when he's like, oh, the Sturgill Simpson song, it's the theme song. So it's hard to sort of know if that's what that is, or if, I mean, it's not hard to know. I'm sure he's purposely obscure about it. But for me, it's like, okay, you have like these really killer, cool directors on the tombstones in the graveyard. Like there's a couple, I can't remember their names right now, but they're directors that Jarmusch loves, and their names are on the tombstones. If you don't point that out, like there's a pleasure in being like the person who spots that Easter egg. Like the same thing with the car. It sort of like ruins that for me a little bit.
Without getting sidetracked.
Yeah.
I think that taps into the thing that I bring up almost every episode is like, what excuses does the world building of a movie sort of create for itself? And that's the way in which intertextuality happens at its worst.
Yeah.
Is that if something is self-referential in that way, then any sort of like shitty move, like a joke that isn't funny, is about that.
Yeah.
Or a self-referentiality that really is overbearing. Well, it's a meta comment on self-referentiality. It's like there's all these excuses built in that it can sort of create a way in which it gets away with its own limitations.
Yeah. And then something I like that becomes something I don't like is, so zombie films have been political since the jump. You know, the very first Night of the Living Dead is one of the great race movies of all time. I mean, it's always in Romero's movies, especially consumerism and stuff like that. I think the way Jarmusch approaches politics in this movie, like the politics he talks about, it's not even as smart as a Jimmy Kimmel monologue. I mean, it's really trite. It's really embarrassing. Like the whole like "Make America White Again" hat, it's just so fucking corny.
Yep.
And then, although it was a funny moment in the movie theater where he's like, "Coffee's black enough for me," or something, like he basically makes like a racist joke. The whole audience is quiet until this black dude, like 2 people down from me, starts laughing. Then the whole audience starts laughing.
That would have been
like,
fun. Yeah,
it was kind of funny because it's like, I mean, I didn't feel the need to like laugh out loud. It wasn't that funny, but it was funny hearing like, you know, like this, like the audience didn't know what to do with it, and they needed like the permission of this person's voice to like laugh at it. Like one person laughed and it broke.
That's good. As an aside, the theater we were in was completely dead. No one laughed at anything except right next to us was this straight couple that laughed at everything super hard continuously through the whole movie.
Yeah, that was me. I was laughing through the whole movie like a psycho. Like in the theater was silent.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, I'm in the fucking
But what
weirdo.
it did for me is it made me cynical about every joke.
Yeah.
Because the movie now had a laugh track, because the laugh track happens whether it's funny or not.
Yeah.
In a sitcom, like it doesn't matter the scale of a joke. The laugh track laughs super hard at every joke in a sitcom. It was like that. So I had this sort of reaction sitting next to me that was at the exact same volume no matter what happened on screen.
what a
So
bummer.
I completely lost my gauge of what was happening on screen.
Yeah.
I didn't know what was funny and what wasn't. Actually, that's not true. The zombies saying what they were into, I thought was not funny.
Yeah, same. I thought it
Terrible.
was like trash.
It's such a lazy bit.
Yeah. Also, like this is the thing too. Like Jarmusch lately, especially in Patterson, there's this theme of repetition that happens. Like there's twins, and he sees another set of twins, and one person says a line of dialogue, and a nearly identical set of dialogue comes along later. And the Chardonnay joke, they telegraphed the Chardonnay joke early on.
Yeah.
Like there's like, well, she loved her Chardonnay, like the woman who's dead in the cell, and then she wakes up and goes, Chardonnay. It's just like I get what he's doing with repetition, or at least I think I might understand it. But for a joke, it doesn't work.
Yep.
Yeah.
Another level to this is the whole polar fracking thing.
Yeah. Fucking stupid.
But the thing is, when I saw the movie, I didn't know if he was making a joke about making zombie films political, because polar fracking gets repeated a bunch of times. And at first I thought, God, they're just beating this political issue to death. It's really annoying. But when a character says, because of the polar fracking, it's like,
It's
oh,
funny.
wait, I think it's a
Yeah.
joke now. But then if you watch Jim Jarmusch talking at a press conference, he is dead serious about climate change, which, well, I would hope he is. I hope everybody is serious about what's happening with the planet. But it sort of means like, I don't think there's a joke in there. I think that I think my confusion is not my problem. I don't
Yeah.
need to know where he stands. I just think that it was heavy-handed whether it was authentically a political position he was trying to slam into the audience, or if he was being ironic
Yeah.
about his own position. Either way, it was just really cumbersome and not funny and not interesting.
If I was going to be generous to that stuff in this film and like expect that he's playing like three-dimensional director chess here, there's so many issues going on that it almost feels like today's political climate, like, oh my God, there's a Trump guy, and there's polar fracking, and there's hipsters. It's like all this stuff that people are like have anxiety about. And then there's like the whole stuff where like the consumers, and they're walking around looking at their phones, and they're zombies like they were before,
This reminds me of the Dead Kennedys album Frankenchrist, where every single song seems to be an endless monologue of everything that Jello hates.
Yeah.
It's like he tried to pack every political issue into every song on that album, so none of the songs are really about anything. They're just like the top 20 things that he hates in every song, and so it just becomes a wash of bitching.
Yeah.
As opposed to an incisive critique about anything.
Yeah. But Jarmusch is so ironic that it's hard to know if, like how to take it kind of. It's like with like when you read like Thus Spake Zarathustra, you're like, am I supposed to be taking this character seriously or not? Like you don't really know.
Yeah.
Or at least I don't. I mean, like I have no idea.
So if this movie was by another director, how would that change things?
I don't think
I know
this-
that's a silly question, but
I mean, I don't think this could like if you put this script in another director's hands, I mean, it's not going to survive. It's not. It's going to be so different than what we're looking at that it wouldn't even. I don't even know how you'd answer that question. Really.
yeah. No, fair enough.
But I know what you're getting at. It's just like the pacing and the feel of it is so important.
Oh, I'm sorry.
it.
I more meant if this movie did not have a director's name on it at all.
Oh,
And
if I didn't know it was Jim Jarmusch movie, and I
if
watched
nobody
it cold.
knew, if there was
Yeah.
just like Jim Jarmusch's mythology and what you know about him brought to this movie, would you think more or less of it, or neither? Do you think? I mean, again, that's the question that I think is not a good question.
Yeah,
but
well, I think it's actually a great question. It was a question I used to ask one of my rhetoric professors at Berkeley. I had this question of like, there's the whole, it's been so long since I thought about this, but there's basically like different ways that rhetorical forces can act on a person. And I always wanted to know, like, well, what about the reputation of somebody? Like if somebody is like, like a Joe Rogan type, right? And he tells you something about martial arts. If you took that, like the transcript of him saying it versus him saying it, would you have a different feel for it? It's like people who love, movies by directors, and maybe the movie's not great, but they're loyal to it or whatever.
Well, you're talking about where you went to school. I think Judith Butler is a perfect example of this.
Yeah,
like we revere Judith Butler. Have you read her? I tried.
Yeah, so I've read her and don't revere her.
There you go. But, she's at least around here in these parts, everybody loves Judith Butler. Nobody's read her.
Yeah.
And that's about reputation.
Yeah, she's a great example. Because I also, like, I think, God, if you could just bury it out, I mean, if you could dig it out of her fucking writing, like, there's, like, really important ideas in there that were pretty influential to other people. I mean, a lot of people, like, for instance, this household that I'm sitting in right now.
Absolutely.
But I think her writing is exactly what Schopenhauer is complaining about when he talks about people who are intelligent and bury ideas in obscure prose because they don't know how to do it otherwise, and which to him is shitty writing. And I think it's shitty writing.
So is that, in The Dead Don't Die, shitty filmmaking? He was trying to make a self-referential genre comedy, but actually, despite his skills as a filmmaker, didn't know how, he wasn't up to the task, so he just buried it in irony.
Yeah, so I think this movie fails a lot, but it happens to fail in a way that I enjoy. And I think like you could probably, if you're into like really obscurant neologism-filled like writing, you might really approach Judith Butler and really enjoy it, or you might even just get off on the pure difficulty of it, I think once you've dug through it enough, like in her case, there's not enough there to justify like the slog, or at least for me it wasn't. I mean, I'm sure other people have other opinions on it, but like I tried fucking hard.
Yeah.
Because I remember when I went there, I was like, I know she would probably hate me, like as a person, like in everything I stand for. So I was like, man, if I just really knew her books really well, if I ran into her and said something really smart about it, like maybe like I would like win her over. And of course that never happened, but I made a good faith effort to read it, and it just wasn't for me. And I think probably a lot of people would come to this movie in the same way.
Sure.
Like if you're like a look at my VHS collection Instagram.
Oh, they all hated this movie.
Like they were not into this movie at all.
I think something, I brought this up on like episode 11, our Return of the Living Dead episode, and our episode about Cabin in the Woods, that something that horror comedy almost always does, whether it's either those films or the Scream franchise for sure, is that they're usually self-referential, and that's almost always what the comedy is based in. Mm-hmm. And it's usually meta. And what happens when you've got self-referential comedy is that when you try to approach it critically, it can be difficult because it's already done the critical work for you. Mm-hmm. And that's where the comedy in like self-referential, ironic comedy lies, and is in its self-critique. Yep. And it becomes hard to unravel it. And then that becomes connected to what I was saying earlier about it's got these built-in excuses when things don't work.
Yeah.
However, what I find frustrating about this movie is it's got that built in, that it's very self-referential comedy, but it's so clunky at it that it doesn't do the critical work.
Yeah.
It doesn't, it's attempting to, I'm sorry, I shouldn't talk about it as if I know what it's doing. What it seems to appear to be doing is deconstructing itself as you go.
Yeah.
And I think it doesn't at all.
No.
Neither as a critical function or as a comedy function.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you brought up the deconstruction thing, because it is kind of like, like what do they say when people are like fucking corny graphic designers talk about their work? They're like, I'm playing with the ideas of blah, blah, blah. It's like he's like playing with the ideas of a zombie movie.
Yeah. And
so there are things that are taken part. There's elements that are taken part. And even just maybe early 60s genre is a part of this too, because Tilda Swinton's Alien thing is totally out of like a 1960s like flying saucer movie, and like even the manner in which like the police force comports itself in the small town is sort of like a 60s thing. And there's a lot of, I watched a bunch of interviews with Jarmusch and everybody. Like there's a lot of camera techniques and movements and stuff that are very referential to films of the time. So it's doing that really, really well. But you take it apart, but it's not saying anything new for having taken it apart. Like it's not like just taking it apart and looking at the pieces in interesting ways hasn't made a new, more interesting thing, which is that's like the whole deconstructionist Jacques Derrida thing. It's like, I mean, you don't have to be it's so funny. I'm like totally into him, but like not so into Judith Butler. I couldn't even tell you why. They're both like kind of cut from the same cloth.
Oh, yes.
But like, I feel like when you read something of his work, you've at least come to whatever he was looking at in a different way. You know, it's not right often or wrong. I mean, you couldn't apply the title right to it or whatever, but you're forced to look at it a different way. I didn't feel like I looked at film or zombie movies in a different way from this. I mean, ultimately, I just really like any time the camera's on Tilda Swinton or Adam Driver and Bill Murray and Chloe Sevigny. Like that, like those moments to me were so enjoyable to watch that it kind of makes up for the rest of the movie. Like I thought the Steve Buscemi stuff was trash. Just because it's so obvious, you know.
The whole subplot of the kids at juvie.
Where does it even go? It has no relevance to the rest of the film.
Yeah, which wouldn't bug me that much if it was at least more interesting and had its own velocity.
Yeah, like those characters are just not strong enough to have this plot that goes nowhere. Like why? I didn't even remember that until you just said it.
Yeah,
like I had no memory of it.
And I think the clunkiest thing for me is actually Hermit Bob, the Tom Waits character, which may be hypersanity, but regardless, I think show me, don't tell me is imperative in art. And there are no rules and there are glorious exceptions, but generally speaking, it's pretty much a rule that if you have someone explain shit to you, it's chipping away at its potential to be a better work.
Yeah.
And this movie has Tom Waits just sort of like explain heavy-handedly a bunch of bullshit at the end and try to sum it all up. And it fucking eats away at an already hole-filled movie.
Yeah. And they're like, it's weird too, like things like the Hermit Bob character is kind of the thing that ties the whole movie together.
He's like from Our Town. What's the character that wanders around and points to?
I can't remember. I'm
sorry.
In like sixth grade or something. But like the character, he's an outsider, right? That's his whole thing. He's on the outside of a town, but it's already kind of an outsider town. You know, it has a weird outside of time Twin Peaks element to it. But there's no like stakes for the relationships with each other. Like, you know, Chloe Sevigny's character like basically commits suicide and they don't really totally give a shit at all, you know. And then the character who does display hypersanity is Adam Driver's character. Yeah. You know, because he's like, this is all going to end badly. And he like...
Well, he's kind of the stoner from Cabin in the Woods.
Yeah.
Like just like, oh, I know what's happening. It's this. Here's what we need to do.
And there's like the weird reference to him being in Star Wars, like his keychain.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah, there's just like weird stuff. Some of it I thought, like for some reason that made me laugh, but other stuff didn't.
Sure.
I mean, I left the theater not totally knowing how to take the movie. And I realized that like that's a thing I'm into these days. Like I want to leave and have to think about like what I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it mostly made me think about what didn't work. Yeah. And I didn't know where to begin. Can I just bitch about the pragmatics of this movie for a minute? Something that as fight choreography and action movies become more technically adept at what that looks like, not everything can be John Wick.
No.
But I think that this exemplified a problem that arises with a lot of action and horror movies, which is the finale, at least the Adam Driver, Bill Murray, when they finally get killed at the end. Did we give a spoiler warning at the beginning of this episode?
I mean, God, if you're listening to this show, you already know what the fuck's up.
That's true. something I appreciated about Zombieland, as I mentioned in that episode, is he's running, he's got his car keys, he can't get them in, he drops them, he does another lap, he comes back. The choreography of what would have really happened in that situation is real. Like, you just keep running. You see an opportunity and you go for the hole. That last shootout scene, they could have gotten away easily. Instead, they decided to go like back to back and waste a lot of ammo and not run away, not shoot a hole, just sort of sacrifice themselves for no reason.
No tactics.
Yeah. And I don't expect everybody in a movie to have great tactics. I don't expect people not to panic. I don't expect people not to fall down. I don't expect people to make good decisions. I do expect them to have basic survival skills.
Yeah.
And that scene was just lazy action film choreography. And it happens in most action films. It happens at some point. Like, wait, why didn't he just duck? Wait, why did he just stand there and wait for that person who was winding up for a roundhouse to punch him in the face?
Yeah.
You know, and I think we've seen too many action movies for that sort of shit to be excusable.
Yeah.
It's unrealistic, and it's bad filmmaking, and it's the finale of your fucking movie, and you've got some characters who are fighting for their lives and just sort of like suddenly mysteriously for no reason become bad at it because it says in the script that it's time for them to die.
Yeah. Well,
I found that very frustrating.
Yeah, I think from like a person who knows at least anything about martial arts and you watch film, it's kind of ruins movies for you a little bit.
Yeah.
Unless you can really appreciate corny fight photography. Like one of the things I love about Cobra Kai is it just takes karate seriously. Like the series of YouTube that's like basically the Karate Kid series, but the characters are old now. It's hilarious. But there is a single shot fight scene that happens in a high school between like 40 people, and it's not great. It's like if there was a fight scene in Glee, but but it's so of what it is. Yeah. It's like a high school karate fight, and it's in my opinion is just delightful, right?
Cool.
But you have to, but it's not good either. Like you sort of have to be like a connoisseur of the shitty thing that you're looking at. And I again, to be generous to the end of the movie, you could almost say that it's like this weird, stupid Sam Peckinpah, like going out in a blaze of glory just because that's how you think it should go down thing, especially since like Adam Driver's character is driven by knowledge of the screenplay.
Right.
So it's almost like to me, like if I was going to get nerdy and want to defend this film, I would say it is a question of free will. And like, do these characters have free will?
Okay, totally. I think that is backing into the excuses that this film makes with self-referentiality.
Right.
But I don't think that if that's what it was going for, is if it was like the script says this and there's no free will, so he's going to die.
Yeah.
Then that scene would have been different. It wouldn't have just been mediocre action cinema. I think the great converse of all of this is, on one hand, we have John Wick. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, we have the Jeremy Saulnier movies. Maybe not Murder Party and not Hold the Dark, but Green Room and Blue Ruin, in which you have two really, really violent thriller films in which the violence is cumbersome and precarious and mostly fails continuously. And so...
What do you mean, like that you don't think it's effective?
No, I think those are two masterful movies.
Oh, okay.
They're sort of like the opposite of John Wick. It's like John Wick is like when you've got a master at the helm and it's almost surreal how perfect it is and the choreography is great. Saulnier's Green Room and Blue Ruin are like what it would be, how it's a realistic depiction of if you've got someone who's taking revenge and is completely amped up and doesn't really know what they're doing, they're probably going to get themselves hurt and they're not going to be very good at revenge.
Yep.
And Green Room, just like you got a bunch of people trying to kill each other, shit's going to go crazy.
Yep.
And then it's not fun crazy, it's just gross, ugly crazy, and it's cumbersome and it's hard to watch. And that is very different from kind of slightly not very good at knowing to run away from something that's trying to kill you.
Yeah. It's not even particularly true to zombie movies. Like zombie movies, people tend to, I mean, there's a bunch of dumbassery in zombie movies, but for whatever reason, people tend to sort of, especially modern zombie movies, act somewhat more intelligently than in, like, say, a slasher film or something like that. And I think it's part of the pleasure of a zombie film is like people think all the time what they would do, especially if you're a fan of it. So people like usually zombie movies, even like shitty ones on Netflix or something, I almost always notice there's something I've never seen before in a zombie movie. You're like, oh, I had never thought about that would be a good survival strategy.
Right.
This movie has none of that.
Totally.
Yeah, like it doesn't make any, make any ground. Although it does introduce interesting stuff like the animals disappearing. I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah. And polar fracking, that's genius.
Jesus Christ, that shit's stupid. That's just straight up some CNN level bullshit.
This doesn't bring anything new to the genre, but I will say to Jim Jarmusch's credit, he made an observation about zombies that had not quite occurred to me before. I mean, the idea that the thing about zombies is often they are us. In some way, they're an analog or a metaphor for humanity. But the way he described it once, he said, monsters in films like like Godzilla or Frankenstein, they come from outside the social structure and they are menacing from outside of it. With Romero, the zombies come from within a collapsing social structure. And they're also victims as well. So it's very interesting what Romero did with zombies, making them both the victims and the monsters.
Yep.
I never quite thought of that. That's really interesting. I mean, unfortunately, it doesn't play itself into this film in a way like that describes other zombie films very well and not necessarily his own. But the within, without, I think is interesting.
Yeah, I think like maybe one of the reasons why that doesn't kick off so well is you don't really see characters well, that's not true. I was about to say you don't see characters you care about turned, but you see the RZA is almost borderline set up to be like a magical Negro character.
Right.
And then he's a zombie. So it's like it kind of undercuts that thing that could have been really fucking corny. Like if the RZA came back and saved everybody, you'd just be like, oh my God, this is terrible. But I'm such a Wu-Tang fan. I was happy to see him in the film no matter what.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think also, it's funny. I don't want to defend this movie too much. I didn't dislike this movie so much, but I thought it was also, as we do, I went online and tried to see what other people had to say about it.
Yep.
And I was surprised at how many, like on YouTube alone, how many YouTube videos reviewed this movie with absolute hatred.
Yeah.
Can't say I've seen that with any other movie. I'm not saying it's more than any other movie. Just like I've never gone looking for reviews for any other movie where I've seen just like, it felt like hundreds of just like hate for this movie. And dipping into some of them, it seemed like, my impression is that they were all genre people who didn't like this person treading on their territory.
Yeah.
My impression is that these are people who would take a really shitty zombie movie from some generic hack horror movie director.
Yeah, as long as they had some kills.
Right.
Yeah.
Over this interloper.
Yeah.
Who tried to do something lofty.
Yeah.
And that was the offense, is originality. And on one hand, I kind of get it because, for example, the pleasure in watching slasher movies from the 80s is that they're all the same. There's a formula and you delight in that formula. The thing that we love about hardcore punk is hardcore punk sounds like hardcore punk. And it's about subtle variation. It's not about experimentation.
Right.
Necessarily. I'm sort of painting with a broad stroke brush there.
Yeah.
But that reminds me of something that, do you know about the whole Roger Ebert and the Raid Redemption thing? Mm-mm. Do you mind if I go down a detour for a little while?
I love that movie.
I got some reading to do at you. So the movie The Raid Redemption, which is an Scottish-directed Indonesian action movie that we cannot imagine John Wick without The Raid Redemption.
Yeah, I mean, it's like...
And The Raid 2, both of them.
I mean, I think the fight choreography in the Raid movies is probably better
Maybe.
than the John Wick movies.
It's bananas.
Yeah.
So Roger Ebert fucking slammed it. He slammed it so hard.
What a fucking loser.
And got crazy scorn for it. And he reevaluated it. And I think he went from 1 stars to 2.5 stars.
What
He
a
was
pussy.
like, well, no, hang on. Okay. Well, hang on. So I want to read part of his it's not a retraction, it's a reevaluation. He wrote an article, but like, here's why I did that in the first place, and here's why I'm changing my mind. And I think this is really fascinating. I think it plays into this a bit, into the being protective of genre. So Roger Ebert said in his re-review of The Raid Redemption, I can't take this much longer. I can't function like a butcher's scale. Is it enough to spend 2 hours determining if a film achieves its generic purpose? Shouldn't it do more than that? Perhaps provide some humor, humanity, romance, suspense, beauty, tragedy, poetry? Not all of those qualities, but at least several of them. The Raid didn't even supply a single good-looking publicity still. These thoughts, some readers inform me, are a function of my age. I'm too old to appreciate a movie like this any longer. That may be true. It doesn't mean I lack the ability. It means I have grown beyond that stage. I am not as easily satisfied. When I began as a film critic, the word genre suggested a type of film that had highly developed traditions, possibilities, and richness. Now it suggests a marketing decision. These days, audiences enter a film like this with tunnel vision. They know what they want, and they'd better find it. A film surpasses the requirements of its genre only at hazard. One of the best recent crime films, Drive, was close to a masterpiece. Sarah Deming, a Michigan woman, filed a lawsuit against its distributors, claiming its trailer was misleading. Entertainment Weekly summarized her complaints. Drive was promoted as very similar to Fast and Furious, when actually it wasn't. Drive bore very little similarity to a chase or race action film for reasons including, but not limited to, Drive having very little driving in the motion picture. In other words, she was offended that the film surpassed its genre. This news item got a good deal of publicity at the time. I wonder if it was a billboard on Hollywood's highway to hell. Anyway, I don't totally agree with him, but I think it's a really interesting look at the issue of genre, of being too attached. I think this happens with superhero movies and people's investments on like, well, that wasn't in the comic. I think this is all part of the same thing.
Yeah.
I don't believe we had these issues 30 years ago. I think this is a very contemporary, again, I'm not saying that this is completely new, but I think that this is a generally new phenomenon of people clinging to the part of it that they as a fan feel like they are owed. And I think zombie films are just as much a part of that as the MCU.
Yeah. I think your comparison to like zombie films as punk rock is way more on point for me. And that like you're going to, because you go to it because you like a certain thing and you expect a thing. Like if you went to like a punk show at Gilman Street and fucking Jethro Tull came out, you'd be bummed, you know? I mean, you can make a case for like, oh my God, this is so avant or whatever. But at the end of the day, you're like, man, I came to see a hardcore show and this clown with the flute is dancing around. And the thing you just read, it's interesting. He talks about like age being the reason why you wouldn't get the Raid.
Well, I edited part out. He was also partly complaining this feels like a video game, and people think that I can't appreciate it because I don't like video games, and that's maybe fair, but that doesn't mean that a film being reduced to nothing but satisfying people who want a video game in film form, that's somehow a good thing.
Yeah, see, I think like when it comes to action sequences, it's kind of a different thing altogether. This is like what Armand White talks about, like, you know, the Buster Keaton style kinetic filmmaking is that you're using film for what it can do. You're showing like this, like, you know, ballet of violence to it. It doesn't, you know, a movie doesn't need a plot. It doesn't need that stuff. It doesn't have to have that stuff. I mean, look at like Jodorowsky's movies. Like, what the fuck's going on there? And they're great. So why couldn't a movie just be the best fight scenes you've ever seen in a movie, and that's it. Like, because I mean, like,
Sure.
the raid plots are pretty stupid. Like, I couldn't even really tell you exactly what they are. I think it's like there's a double cross and a cop, and
he actually makes a really awesome point in his article. He's like, it starts off, his wife is pregnant. He says goodbye. That just solved 30 pages of dialogue.
Yeah.
And he's like, at the film's peril, like, it's good if you just want to get to the action, but as a cinematic experience, yeah, what about that woman? It's just completely flat. It's just completely generic.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm not totally agreeing. I'm just seeing his point very
Yeah,
much.
this definitely moves me into the unusual territory of sort of defending like contemporary art type stuff, where it's like, yeah, like what are the rules? Like, there's no rules. Like, this is art, you know. And I feel like that a little bit about, not a little bit. I feel like a lot about that with this Dead Don't Die movie. Like, you could have the similar lawsuit to the trailer for this movie. Is a fast cut trailer that shows pretty good amount of whatever action there is, and then like celebrity. Like, part of the allure of this movie was how jam-packed it was with Jarmusch cast members of past. And I thought like seeing this movie was a totally different experience than what I was thinking. Like, I was not expecting an incredibly self-referential, fourth wall breaking weird movie. Like it was. And I think that was so silly to me that I just really enjoyed it. Like, the whole thing with the Sturgill Simpson song. I love Sturgill Simpson. Like, probably, like, I think of any music that's come out in the last 10 years might be my favorite. And just to have it so forward in this movie for like no reason, it's just hilarious. It's like saying, I'm a huge fan of this dude that probably most people seeing this film haven't even heard of. But here it is.
Yeah, I'd never heard of him. I thought that was a pretty funny device.
Yeah.
It worked for me.
That he rules.
You know, I just realized at the very beginning of this episode, I think you said you had 3 problems with this movie in particular, and you got through 2 of them, and I think I sidetracked you. Was there a third that you didn't?
Yeah, the third one was like something that I probably... it's just that some stuff just doesn't go anywhere. And I know that's kind of a Jarmusch thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I mean, just like in a zombie movie, you expect some sort of like if you're playing with the form of the zombie movie and you're really dedicated to it in the ways that he is, like, he's so by the numbers in a really like kind of fun way. Like the 3 kids in the car, like their whole subplot. I mean, I don't know. It just, I feel like there could have been like tighter connections between the sequences. But then again, like Coffee and Cigarettes, like that movie, like nothing connects. It doesn't really matter.
Right.
It's like I'm caught in between being like the corny horror fan that hated this movie and being like a diehard Jarmusch fan that like will excuse pretty much anything he does in service of his art.
Right.
Like, I feel like very like in the middle on it, and my problems and enjoyments are totally contradictory. You know, like I wouldn't recommend this movie to anybody.
No,
but I would probably watch it a few more times.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And I mean, I think that both ways, like we were talking about, there are no rules, and there are no rules for how a movie should be, but there are also no rules for how you would think a movie should be.
Yeah,
I think that we live in an era where we live in a consumerist culture, and that's gone back a long way. But I think the way that applies to art currently with the power of the fan is really troublesome for how it affects art and art criticism.
Yeah, nowhere worse than Star Wars anything.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Like, why do fans have a say in any of it? Why do test screenings even exist? It's mysterious to me. And
it's so insane to me. I mean, it's like, it reminds me of the Ford thing where it's like, if I asked people what they wanted, I would have made another horse carriage or whatever. Yeah. It's just like,
well, it also makes me think of Game of Thrones. What just happened strikes me as being, I don't want to overstate this and then have to explain it for a half hour, but if I say that I think that the problem with everybody's reaction to the final season of Game of Thrones is the exact same reason why Donald Trump is our current president, does that
it doesn't make any
sense to you?
No.
Fuck. Okay, I don't want to explain this for too long, but the way negativity floats so quickly and becomes the object of all media, people's complaints, that the loudest complainer in the room gets the most airtime, is what created such a chaotic contention election cycle, and trolls introducing chaos and complaint becomes the dominant narrative. And what I mean by applying that to Game of Thrones is that fans think they're owed something. There was no way for Game of Thrones to satisfy everybody. So the people who weren't satisfied went online and complained. And because complaints float to the top, they became the narrative. And when people went online immediately to see what other people were saying, all they saw were complaints.
Yeah.
And so that made more people complain. And if you go online, Game of Thrones final season, it's just people shitting on it profoundly.
Yeah.
Because it didn't fan service everybody.
Yeah. People wanted like these resolutions the way they wanted them.
Right.
Like
even though that's exactly what Game of Thrones never did. That is
Yeah.
exactly contrary to what why we love Game of Thrones, is it doesn't play these.
Well, why you guys love Game of Thrones?
Why people who love Game of Thrones love Game of Thrones is it undercut a lot of traditional narratives. You know, George R.R. Martin was very intent on not reproducing Tolkien-esque heroic journeys.
Yeah.
And so when he did exactly what he said he would do, people freaked the fuck out and, you know, made petitions to redo season 8. And the fact that anybody thinks that they have any say in it, and that people are upset about how this work of art turned out, is all so mysterious to me.
I mean, first of all, if you signed a petition to like redo Game of Thrones, you need to just go stuff your head in a fucking toilet and flush it until you fucking drown.
Yes.
Like, I mean, just for real. Like, first of all, what the fuck are you doing? Second of all, do you know how fucking Hollywood works? It's not how it works. Like, that's never, ever happened. And like, in your opinion, they're so fucking stupid. So there's that. And I think the problem with Game of Thrones is it's a nihilist story. Like, there is nihilism. Like, there's ultimately, like, nobody really wins. Nobody, like, is happy. There's no heroism. There isn't. I mean, like, the only heroism in the film is just self-serving. It's like, oh, I fucking don't want to die. It's like the heroism of a zombie movie, basically.
Right.
And then I think the reason why people are dissatisfied with that is because fucking nihilism sucks. Like, I mean, I'm not saying it's not like what we're in or it's not realistic or whatever, but like, there's just something about like when you throw out the idea of heroism and truth and people being good guys and all the corny shit from the 80s that people like to shit on, when you don't have it anymore, what are you left with? Game of Thrones season 8, man. Like it's dissatisfying. It's like, well, the world's dissatisfying. And there's just such this turn to nihilism that I think puts people into a constant state of depression and dissatisfaction with their lives. And like, at least with Tolkien, you can root for a fucking hobbit. I mean, like, like you got Samwise Gamgee's being a bro, you know? Like, what do you have with Game of Thrones? You got nothing. Like a dude and his sister fucking each other and a dragon blows them up. I mean, come on. It's fucking trash, you know? But if I was George R.R. Martin, what I would do for the next Game of Thrones book, I would release a fucking choose your own adventure book with the top 10 upvoted alternate Game of season 8 theories from Reddit. Like, that's exactly what I would do.
Great.
I would be like, here you go, fucking losers. Like, whatever you want, your way, right away.
That's
like,
so good.
Yeah. Yeah. Fuck those people.
Just because my blood pressure is already up, can I complain about something?
Yeah,
else?
do it. I mean, I just fucking ripped into Game of Thrones for no reason.
I love Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
So another thing of like going online and doing research for these episodes, and I think you and I've talked about, you know, you come across them all the time, is the entire cast of the film at Cannes, the entire cast of the film at whatever. And when these films above a certain stature, they often include at some point the DP, the director, the writer, and 4 of the stars sitting on some folding tables that are piped and draped behind them, and they all have microphones and they're answering questions from people from Switzerland, right? And every one of them that is a horror one, I've noticed, and actually this happens on one-on-one interviews whenever actors and actresses are doing tours and they have to go on every fucking idiot's TV and webcast show and answer stupid questions that are always the same and always condescending. All of the actors that do these horror movies always talk about how they've always been into horror.
Yep.
And they almost, with few exceptions, always say it in a way that is totally not convincing. And I think what happens is every one of us in the Western world saw our first horror movie at some time. And if we were young enough, it probably left a very, very deep impression, right? So that means every one of us is walking around with a story about the first time we encountered a horror movie and how deeply it resonated with us, positively or negatively. And then you go about your life, and then someday, randomly, some film director asks you to be in a horror movie, and you're like, oh, hey, here's my story about how I connect to horror. But you don't actually connect to horror. You, like every other person alive in this country, has a story about the first time you saw a horror movie and how it scared you. And there's, and your mom, you had to sleep in your mom next to your mom. Like it's not interesting and it's not relevant and it's not deep. It's just a story that connects you to the narrative of horror cinema, which is completely different than people who are actually invested in horror cinema. And so it's just funny to see time after time these actors pretending like they're into horror movies, and they always go like, yeah, I love horror movies like Halloween and like
Saw.
Just like, no, you've seen 5 horror movies in your whole life and you got scared by 1 or 2 of them and now you're in one, and I don't buy it.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't go as far as to say like I don't believe or I believe or disbelieve someone's.
I mean, they're all
interest.
selling something.
Yeah,
I don't buy what they're selling.
What I was going to say is interesting about it is it's part of the pitch. It's part of the sales pitch for the movie. Is like these people are so invested in the genre and they're just also fans because that's a thing, right?
Yeah.
You don't see it in any other genre. It's not like somebody's like, oh my God, I was so into Bridget Jones and I'm so happy to be in a rom-com. I've loved them my whole life. Like, you just don't see that for any other genre.
True.
Maybe sci-fi, but I mean, not I mean, and even then, only like franchise sci-fi. People are like, dude, I got a boner the moment I found out I was in Star Wars. Like that sort of thing. Like I could understand. Like it's such a cultural force. But yeah, it's weird that people do it. But we were talking about off camera or off fucking whatever this is. We were talking about off mic. That the one person who didn't do that was Tilda Swinton. She's basically like, yeah, I pretty much I've only seen the horror movies I was in, and which I think is kind of awesome.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for your honesty.
Yeah.
And the other, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say she's just probably the best part of this movie.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's also the flip side of that is, Jordan Peele like, oh, I've always wanted to do a horror movie.
I believe
really?
him. I believe him.
Yes, he really fucking always did.
Yeah.
And he, when he unleashes his arcane knowledge of horror films, it's torrential. Like, he's the real deal.
Yeah.
Which brings me to that I think something going over all of these horror movies, over all these episodes, we've discovered that most of our favorite horror movies that we've covered, or at least that we've covered from the last 10 years or something, have mostly been by non-horror directors.
Yeah.
And this is another one, and it doesn't work. And I wonder why. It's always so interesting to see what non-horror directors, whatever that means.
Are you saying this one doesn't work because it's a not horror? You're saying
I don't know.
Movies in general don't work?
No, I think they often do. I mean, it just depends, right? A non-horror director doing a horror movie, anything can happen. But some of our favorite horror movies of the last 5-ish years have mostly been by non-horror lifer directors.
Well, they're also great directors. I think they could do anything. You know what I mean? Like Nicholas Winding Refn could probably do a musical, and I would love it.
Right.
What's weird to me about this particular movie is Only Lovers Left Alive tracks as a legit great vampire movie. There's really interesting new things that he's introduced in the genre. And in this movie, he does try to introduce some things like the dust. Instead of there being blood, there's dust, which I appreciate, but also think is stupid. Like I appreciate it was an attempt to do something different, but there's no, like when people are like choking on it and breathing on it, it's like, oh fuck, did I just become a zombie? Like that to me would have been interesting. Like, oh, there's zombie dust because there's zombie dust in voodoo, which I think would be kind of like there's something kind of like a bit of a miss there. But I wonder, I would love to sit down and say, okay, you made a totally convincing vampire movie that vampire people love. How did you end up making a zombie movie that zombie fans hate?
Right.
Like what? And it's really like it's fucking zombie movies are like playing t-ball. It's right there, dude. Like I mean, you gotta like hit yourself in the dick with the bat to fuck it up, you know? I mean, for real, like some fucking military veteran dudes with the YouTube channels made a fucking great zombie movie, you know, Range 15. Like, so, like, it's not impossible.
Was it great, though?
It's its own thing, man. Okay. I think it's great. Like, sometimes I appreciate how a thing gets made in a way that, like, for sure. It's like, you know, it's like, yeah, of course. Like, maybe, like, if you were to go into it cold and not know what was going on in that movie, you'd probably think it was trash. But, I mean, they got Samwise Gamgee's and William Shatner in it. I mean, it's hard not to love. But yeah, like I just love to sit down and be like, did you know you were making a movie that people wouldn't like? And if you did, why did you do that?
Yeah.
You know, I'm just totally curious.
So I really don't like saying shoulds with art because I think at best we just take it as it is and talk, you know, think about what it's doing on its terms. But because you and I seem to agree that this had profound problems and you listed 3 concretely and we've been talking about it. If you were giving notes, like you sat down, Jarmusch was like, hey, rough cut of this movie, give me your notes. What do you think could be more solvable about this film? Or is it kind of just, not the premise, but it's on shaky foundation already?
Yeah, I mean, the things I would suggest would make it not a Jarmusch film. So that I think that would be a problem with it initially. But I would say someone should go rescue the kids from the home. Like that should happen, or the kids should rescue somebody, something like that. Like there should be some connection to that. I think would be a thing that happened. I would probably,
or if I may, or if the stories could parallel somehow. They maybe not intersect, but maybe if there was I'm just thinking another option is if you could see this is how it's happening here, and this is how it's happening here, and it's very similar. And at least conceptually they lined up.
Or even the Jarmuschian repetition where they both walk past the same thing. Something totally. Like that. Some sort of like thematic connection.
Yep.
That's something I would do. I would probably leave the reason for the zombie thing completely unexplained. That's more in line with the genre anyway. Like, I guess in Return of the Living Dead, there's a news thing. It's like, there's a meteor. Like, I might even just done, there's a meteor.
Wait, Return of the Living Dead?
Or Night of the Living Dead. I think one of them, there. It's like, I just like that it's never really quite explained. And I think that's kind of a fun thing about zombie movies is that it's just like, it starts with the pedal to the floor. And you don't need to, who cares why? Like, you know, fuck it. I probably would have given Closavini a better death just because I like her so much.
I don't even remember it.
She just like basically sees her grandmother on the outside of the car and goes, I'm coming for you, grandmother. And like, it's just... Great. It's kind of a weak death. It's also odd that her character, I mean, this is for sure me being infected with modern political ideas in a way that I don't like. But
it's me rubbing off on you if you're about to get feminist.
It's terrible. Well, she was kind of just a shrill, useless character. Yes. And for being the main female character in the movie to be completely shrill and useless.
And a cop.
Like, yeah, if she wasn't a cop... if she was just his girlfriend or something, like an unimportant character, yeah, maybe. But, and it's not like he doesn't have strong female characters. Yeah. You have fucking samurai alien right there, you know? Yeah, I don't know. Like that's, stuff like that. Like that's what I would probably change.
I think that the film would have been better if it was a little slower.
I was going to say that too. Like if it was even slower, it sounds crazy.
The moments that happened a little faster are actually what took it out. And I think I would say anytime there is an overt joke, take it out. Because I think all the funniest moments are the Carol Kane. She they chop her head off. She opens her eyes. Chloe Sevigny screams. Bill Murray just shoots her in the head.
Yeah, it's just funny deadpan.
It's really funny deadpan. You don't see her get shot in the head. That's funny. But Chardonnay is not funny. Every joke in this film is not a funny joke. The funniest parts are just like Bill Murray taking 30 seconds to answer a question.
Yeah.
And if it leaned more heavily into that.
And like to me, like the repetition is super funny. Like the thing I laughed at the most was when every person kept going into the diner and they all kept saying the same thing. Like,
it's like it
was animals or several animals.
Yep.
Like the fact that it just kept happening. I mean, it was just like so goofy. It's like one of those things. It's very Tim and Eric. Like it keeps going, and the more it keeps going, it gets funnier and funnier. And it's almost like this movie could have been a little bit darker. But then that's not a Jarmusch thing. But
yeah. What else?
I don't know.
Well, what have we learned?
Jim Jarmusch made not a great movie for a lot of people.
I think it's surprising. I had this reaction when watching Hold the Dark, going back to Jeremy Saulnier, that Murder Party, great low-budget film. Blue Ruin, one of the most devastating action movies I've ever seen. Green Room, even better, most devastating action films I've ever seen. Hold the Dark, total miss.
Yeah.
Just couldn't wrap my head around what went wrong with that one. And I think this is a similar thing, like a director who is really honing something beautiful and kind of just missed it, and it's mysterious why, not what's wrong with the work itself necessarily, but also how did we get here? you know? How did it happen?
I feel like his last four movies too were just so singular and different, and like every single one of them seemed like an advancement on the one before it. I mean, like Patterson is like a 13-year-old me would have been like, what the fuck is this boring shit I am watching? But I would say now it's an almost perfect movie. And this felt like a really strong step back from that. And I don't know, maybe it's what happens when you cynically make a horror movie expecting it to work out. You know, maybe no one's immune to, just half-assing it and expecting people are going to show up. I mean, I've never heard him say anything that would lead me to believe that was his thought process. But I mean, I don't know, man. This movie just doesn't. It
could also have been that like, he was just like, I know what'll be fun.
Yeah.
And it was mostly sort of like, this will be a fun project.
Yeah.
Like quick and dirty, get together with my friends. And then it kind of became a bigger thing and became him doing press tours, and there actually being ads on TV, which I think he said was the first time that's ever been true for any of his movies.
I mean, I can't think of any. It's not like I saw Down by Law on TV,
No.
But I would hope that he would keep going. I wonder if he's going to keep trying to make films, because he does like make explicit genre films. Like he made a samurai film, he made a vampire film. I wonder. I mean, I would almost love to see like a Mars Attacks-ish kind of alien movie from him.
Oh,
although not now that it's been done in this movie.
Right.
But yeah.
All right, we do have a piece of mail.
Okay, great.
Sent to us at scarythoughts.org. Which I welcome all of our listeners to reach out to us via. Jeremy Lassen, who was on our It episode when we did our live at Borderlands Books with Jeremy and Meg Eilson. But he wrote in and just quickly said, did you ever see this one? Excision from 2012. I saw it a couple of years ago, but it still haunts me. Have you seen Excision?
No.
Okay, so I watched it like hours later after his recommendation because it was in my queue. And
he's legit. So anything he recommends is going to be solid.
Totally. And I don't know.
What?
About this movie. I don't know. It's sort of, we need to talk about Kevin, speaking of Tilda Swinton. I don't know. And it's funny because he says, this one still haunts me and maybe it'll sit with me harder. I'm kind of glad I saw it. It has John Waters in it. It has Tracy Lords in it.
Weird.
It's a pretty interesting movie. I can't say I've seen anything exactly like it, really. But yeah, I'll leave it at that. I kind of recommend it, but not really.
Is there anything that we haven't covered that you've seen that you would say you got to watch in the horror genre?
You mean very recently or in general?
Just recently.
I have been watching a lot of middle-brow horror movie, like a lot of movies, a lot of them, and it's been incredibly satisfying. It's been incredibly unsatisfying.
Yeah,
and a bummer that I can't find. Like I seem to need to watch like truly shitty ones that are so bizarrely inept that there's something to hang on to, or just watch a Bergman movie.
I've tried to watch a bunch of like Netflix level horror movies.
That's kind of what I'm talking about.
Jesus Christ, man! Like I can't watch them.
It's really unsatisfying.
And I think like probably it's what happened with me with like literature is like I just decided that I was just not going to read trash books. Like, and it's really easy to just completely cut out shitty books. Like that person in your office that recommends something, just don't read that fucking book.
Right. I'm having a hard time applying that to film though. Like I'm just in this rut of watching mediocre television and films. Like, did you watch The Perfection? Speaking of Netflix horror,
no,
it's terrible.
Yeah,
Such a wasted opportunity.
But there are. I kind of what I've been doing with literature is like I've been going back and rereading these like classics that I was made to read in like high school or whatever. So
Catcher in the Rye.
Yeah, I'm reading Catcher in the Rye next week.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Awesome.
So I like but that type of stuff like Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn, just those types of books.
That's cool.
And I have found the experience of reading every single one of them to be an absolute joy because one, they're great. And I'm also reading them like 20, sometimes 30 years past the original time of reading them. And I'm coming to them as a very different person from the first time I experienced it. And also as a writer, I'm looking at what's happening with the words. And it's been like an incredible experience. So I've been kind of doing the same thing with film. So I'm like, okay, what's a canonical horror film that I haven't seen in a long time? And I think that might be my route for it. Like I rewatched The Fly recently.
Yeah.
It's tremendous. Like it's better than anything that was made for Netflix ever.
Great.
Yeah.
I think that another thing that I've been reckoning with a little bit lately, and maybe this is self-help for nihilists territory, but I am past my middle mark. There's no way I'm
for
not
life.
For life.
Yeah.
Like there's no way I'm going to live this many years more.
Mm-hmm.
So that means in all likelihood, any major thing I do is probably never going to happen again. So for example, like I loved Lord of the Flies when I was a kid. If I don't read it again soon, I will probably only have read it as a child.
Yeah.
And I should probably take care of that. I think I don't want to say when you're younger, but there's sort of like the world endlessly comes at you. And if you're hungry for it, it feels like it will continuously make its way to you. You just have to sort of like gently reach out and take it. But at some point it's like, no, you actually have to do the work. And, some of my favorite pieces of music, I completely recognize, like, I might not actually have a chance to sit down and really put headphones on and give it 100% full listen again before I'm dead.
Yeah.
So I should make that fucking happen because, does that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean, it's slightly a you only live once, but it's maybe a little darker because it includes the, like, you're going to be dead soon and this really is the last time. So, like, yeah, my favorite books. I can call some book, oh yeah, that's my favorite book. But if I haven't read it in 30 years and I'm not going to actually live more than 30 more years, then go read your fucking favorite book again before you're dead.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely valid. I think that's a good approach to life because it's like, look, the things that are great deserve the praise that they've been given. Like there's like pretty much no reason for a fucking adult to read a young adult fiction book, like one of these modern like dystopian books. They're fucking terrible. Like go watch the movie. It's as good of an experience.
If
and
that.
I'm not like I used to be way less of a dickhead about this. Like I used to kind of be like, well, any book's good, any book's fine, whatever. But if you're somebody who thinks you care about books, it's critical that you not read trash. If you just like to read and it's fun or whatever, like then read whatever, rock out with your Harry Potter books, whatever. And the exception to this is if you have children and you're making a connection with them and it's kind of a fun thing, like that's a totally different thing.
Yes.
But if you're a person who likes to think of yourself as someone who enjoys film or books or whatever, stop watching trash. You only have so much time left, man. Like there's hardly any. I almost own more books and I'll be able to comfortably read before I'm dead. There's no fucking marketing books in there, man. Like it's like I took all that shit and threw it out, That's not a thing for me anymore. Yeah, I wish I had thought about that sooner. So if you're a younger Scary Thoughts listener, don't watch Netflix, don't read Harry Potter. That's what my message is.
That's pretty solid advice there.
And then George R.R. Martin, if you're listening, I'm pretty sure that Choose Your Own Adventure thing's solid.
That's pretty great.
Yeah.
All right. Let's fade to black and roll the credits. Starting with a reminder, nihilist at scarythoughts.org.
Is it nihilists with an S?
Which one do you want it to be?
Plural. It's
Plural.
self-help
Great.
for nihilists.
Great.
So I think it's...
I'll make both just in case people spell wrong.
Yeah, I know it's up with you people.
And join our mailing list at scarythoughts.org. And we will see you next time for either
Poltergeist with Peaches Christ
or Child's Play. 2019.
With the age of surveillance capitalism as a helper.
Yeah, if you wanna really be like a dedicated Scary Thoughts fan, read the 800-page book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism.
Well, it's only
do the episode.
It's only like 600 pages if you don't count the notes.
But the notes actually, when you read on an e-reader, it's a little bit different to flip back and forth with footnotes.
Yeah.
And actually, I'd say like a third of the footnotes are actually worth reading because they're not just a ibid. It's actually like a paragraph of information. So, yeah.
Well, rock out.
Thanks for listening. No, fuck that.